Welcome to this explainer. So right now, behind closed doors, there is this absolutely fascinating academic civil war raging within the field of psychology. It's a massive battle over how we actually know what we know, and at the dead center of it is a fierce debate over the fundamental rules of science itself. We're going to explore how a huge crisis of confidence triggered a radical reform movement, and why that exact movement is causing so much unbelievable friction. All right, let's just dive right into it.
Imagine opening up a scientific archive. You'd probably expect to find this pristine collection of success stories, right? Just a steady march of human progress. Well, instead, critics looked at psychology's published literature and uncovered what researchers Ferguson and Heaney so perfectly called a vast graveyard of undead theories. See, historically, researchers really only published their successful headline-grabbing results, so countless failed experiments were basically just stuffed into file drawers and completely hidden away. What was left was, frankly, an illusion of constant success, built on a really shaky foundation.
And this unsettling realization brings us to the massive discipline-wide debate that's literally tearing the field apart right now. We have to ask ourselves, is psychology fundamentally broken? Does it need strict, harsh new rules just to survive? Or, as the traditionalists will tell you, are the reformers just totally misunderstanding how human behavioral science actually works in the real world?
Part 1. The Replication Crisis. Let's start with the exact problem that sparked this whole thing, the now famous crisis that blew up around 2011.
The sheer scale of the reality check here was staggering. A group called the Open Science Collaboration orchestrated this absolute mammoth of an effort. 269 researchers banded together to rigorously repeat 100 published, peer-reviewed psychology experiments just to see if they could get the exact same results. And they found something genuinely alarming. Out of 100 studies, only 39 actually replicated. The other 61, the effects seemingly just vanished into thin air. It was a crisis of monumental proportions.
Part 2. Enter Karl Popper. So how exactly do you fix a crisis of confidence like this? Well, to save the discipline, a new wave of scientific reformers turned to the philosophy of science, specifically the mid-20th century philosopher Karl Popper.
Now here's where things get a bit complicated. Sociologists who actually study laboratory life, they know day-to-day research is incredibly messy. Actually, when the famous sociologist Bruno Latour was once asked if science practically proceeds by strict falsification, he just laughed, literally laughed, and called it the textbook version of science. But, these psychology reformers, they weren't deterred by that messy reality. They boldly built their entire reform movement right on Popper's strict textbook ideals.
They leaned incredibly hard on this one philosophical anchor, falsifiability. For Popper, you can't verify a theory. You can only disprove it. So falsifiability is the ultimate mark of a true scientific theory. The reformers took this totally to heart. They argued that if a psychological theory cannot be falsified through strict direct replication, it simply isn't science. It's just history or storytelling. To put Popper's philosophy into practice, they starkly contrasted the old, messy way of doing things with their brand new vision. The old way was full of what they called researcher degrees of freedom. Researchers might secretly tweak a variable here, exclude an outlier there, or engage in harking, which is hypothesizing after the results are known. It's basically shooting an arrow into a wall and then just painting a bullseye around it. The new way, though, demands pre-registration. You absolutely have to separate your exploratory brainstorming from your confirmatory testing, essentially locking in your exact plan before you even collect a single data point.
Part 3. Policing the science. But here's the catch, right? Philosophy alone doesn't actually change behavior. To truly enforce this method, they needed to police the science.
Their brilliant fix for this was the registered reports process. Instead of submitting a finished paper with, shiny, perfect results, researchers submit their plan first. Step 1, you detail your data collection and analysis. Step 2, peers review that proposal based purely on the quality of the question and the method. And then, the real magic is Step 3. If accepted, the journal guarantees publication regardless of the final outcome. Even if your experiment totally flops, it gets published. This effectively kills that file drawer problem dead and ensures falsified theories actually see the light of day.
This all built into an entire ecosystem, essentially engineering an open psychology. Reformers built massive platforms like the Open Science Framework to store and share data transparently. They use PsyArchive for fast, free sharing of preprints, and they rely on places like Twitter, blogs, and PubPeer for unfiltered, instant peer review. Popper always believed in friendly, hostile cooperation, and these new tools created this vast online landscape where tradition holds absolutely zero sway.
Literally anyone, from a first-year grad student to a tenured professor, can openly criticize published research.
Part 4. The pushback. As you might imagine, completely upending the status quo of an entire academic field does not happen quietly. The tension completely exploded into a very real, very spicy controversy over a famous 2008 study by Simone Schnall. Her original study found that when people were primed with concepts of cleanliness, like just washing their hands, they offered milder judgments of moral transgressions. They were literally judging things like putting false info on a CV or, honestly, using a kitten for sexual gratification, which, yes, was a genuine vignette from the study. But in 2014, a massive direct replication attempt completely failed to find this effect. And after that failure, a highly acrimonious debate erupted all over blogs and social media.
The rhetoric got incredibly heated. When the replication failed, one of the replicators triumphantly went on social media and called the original study an epic fail. Well, famous psychologists immediately rushed to Schnall's defense. The eminent psychologist Daniel Gilbert famously accused the reformers of being shameless little bullies. The traditionalists really felt these reformers had adopted a crime control mindset, basically treating every non-replication as a silent accusation of fraud and engaging in what they dubbed replication bullying.
This sparked what we now call the tone debate. It wasn't just about the stats anymore, it was about the culture. Critics like Susan Fiske warned that this unfiltered internet culture of instant peer review was devolving into methodological terrorism and trash talk. She argued this adversarial viciousness was actually driving young researchers entirely out of the field, and she begged for a return to polite, editorially curated journal debates instead of these wild Twitter pylons.
Beyond just the tone, at the very heart of this feud is a deep, fundamental methodological divide over how we actually verify psychological truths. On one side, the reformers absolutely demand direct replication, following the exact same experimental procedure to ensure a phenomenon consistently occurs. Basically, if you can't follow the recipe and bake the exact same cake, the recipe is wrong. But the traditionalists, they advocate for conceptual replication, testing the underlying theory using new, context-sensitive procedures. They argue that because human behavior changes, our experiments have to adapt to capture the underlying psychological mechanism. To back this up, detractors point to the sheer, chaotic complexity of human behavior. Social behavior is intensely context-sensitive. For example, in that cleanliness controversy, Schnall pointed out that her original study used UK students, while the replication used US students. She implied that variations in cultural moral laxness could completely skew the direct results. Therefore, they argue a failed direct test is actually highly ambiguous. You can't step in the same river twice, right? So rigid direct replications really shouldn't be the sole arbiter of truth. Part 5, the irony of rules. And this brings us to the fascinating, ironic twist of this entire explainer.
The paradox here is just fascinating. For decades, traditional researchers used the freedom of conceptual replication to produce this illusion of sameness. If an experiment didn't work, they just tweak the context, add a variable, and claim it supported the grand theory anyway. But by forcing researchers into the absolute rigid constraints of direct replication, the reformers took that freedom away. And in doing so, they inadvertently allowed the true, chaotic variability of human behavior to assert itself entirely on its own terms.
Sociologists call this a moment where the object objects. The ultimate irony of this whole reform movement is that these rigid, Popperian rules didn't just quietly fix psychology by validating the good theories and tossing out the bad ones. Instead, by trying to lock down every single variable, they successfully highlighted how incredibly unpredictable and messy human behavior truly is. The strict rules shattered the illusion of simple, universal psychological laws, causing massive ongoing disruptions across the entire field. So, as we sift through this vast graveyard of undead theories, all these Twitter feuds, and the endless debates over how to apply philosophy to the lab, we are left with a profoundly provocative question. If human behavior is truly this variable, and if our strict experimental rules just keep highlighting our failures to replicate, what is psychology actually good for? And moving forward, are highly controlled quantitative experiments really always the best way to uncover the truth about who we are? That is the question the field absolutely must answer now. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning everything.